In the history of the world, there are some insane stories about kings, battles, and empires, but I guarantee you have never heard one like this. Because in this story, the most dangerous person in the entire kingdom wasn't a king or a prince, he was a slave. A man the world saw as literal property, who, through pure evil genius, climbed his way to the absolute top of a massive empire for one reason: to burn it all to the ground. This is the craziest story of ambition you will ever hear. We're talking about a servant who became the master, a loyal weapon who turned on his owner and destroyed everything he held dear. History is full of brutal betrayals, but this one is an absolute nightmare. In the final chaotic days of a powerful dynasty, this man seized power in the most savage way imaginable. He blinded his masters and murdered their children just to get a throne he was never supposed to have, only to meet an end so gruesome, people were terrified to even whisper his name. This is the story of Malik Kafur, the man who became a sultan for 35 days of terror, and the horrifying legend of the prince he allegedly skinned alive. Our story starts in the 1300s, in the massive Delhi Sultanate, a sprawling empire run by the Khalji dynasty. The guy in charge is Sultan Alauddin Khalji, one of the most powerful and ruthless rulers you will ever hear about. Let me be clear, this guy was an absolute beast. He murdered his own uncle to get the throne, crushed Mongol invasions that destroyed other empires, and had more money than you can possibly imagine. He had spies everywhere, and if you even looked at him wrong, you were done. This sultan trusted absolutely no one because he knew exactly what it took to get power: betrayal. But now, it's 1315, and the great sultan is a total mess. He's sick, he's losing his mind to paranoia, and his iron grip on the empire is slipping. The court, which used to be terrified of him, is now a nest of schemers, all waiting for him to die so they can grab the throne. And right at the center of this chaos is one man, Malik Kafur. Kafur wasn't a noble or a prince. He was a Hindu slave, captured when Alauddin's army conquered Gujarat. But he was incredibly handsome and dangerously smart, and a general bought him for 1,000 dinars, earning him the nickname Hazar Dinari, the 1,000-dinar man. When he was brought before the Sultan, Kafur's rise was meteoric. He went from a nobody slave to a top general, and finally, the second in command of the entire empire. To the paranoid Sultan, Kafur was the perfect weapon. He had no family, no powerful friends. His entire life depended on the Sultan's favor. Alauddin saw him as a loyal tool, the one person who could never betray him. And as the Sultan was dying, his perfect weapon was staring at ultimate power, with only one thing standing in his way: the Sultan's own children. With Sultan Alauddin getting sicker by the day, the court was a ticking time bomb, and nobody knew how to play this dangerous game better than Malik Kafur. He had been waiting in the shadows for years, watching, learning, and planning for this exact moment. The main obstacles to the throne were Alauddin's sons, Khizr Khan and Shadi Khan. Khizr Khan was the oldest, the designated heir, and the man who was supposed to be the next sultan. He wasn't just some spoiled prince. He had a super powerful crew of nobles backing him, led by his extremely influential father-in-law, Alp Khan. This was the established order, the old guard who had run the empire for decades, and Kafur wanted to burn it all to the ground. To Kafur, these princes weren't royalty. They were just roadblocks on his path to absolute power. He knew with chilling certainty that if Khizr Khan became sultan, the old guard would close ranks, and he, the upstart slave, would be thrown out, or more likely, quietly executed. For a guy who had tasted that much power, who had commanded armies and controlled the wealth of nations, there was no way he was going to let that happen. The established nobility had armies, titles, and lineage, but Kafur had something far more powerful: the complete trust of a paranoid, dying king. And so, he launched his attack, not with an army in the field, but with a series of poisonous whispers in the dark. The old guard had armies, titles, and lineage, but Kafur had something better: the ear of a paranoid king. And so, he launched his attack, not with a sword, but with a whisper. He knew the Sultan was obsessed with betrayal because that's how he got the throne himself. So, Kafur gave the Sultan exactly what he expected to see. He began a masterclass in psychological warfare, a slow and patient game of turning a father against his own sons. Day after day, he dripped poison into the Sultan's ear. He told the dying king that his oldest son, Khizr Khan, was just a party boy who couldn't wait for his father to die so he could take over the empire. He faked messages, hired spies to create false reports, and invented evidence of treason, claiming that Khizr Khan and his powerful father-in-law, Alp Khan, were building a secret army to launch a coup. Kafur's strategy was brilliant and terrifying. He systematically cut the Sultan off from everyone, his family, his trusted advisors, his loyal nobles, until the only voice Alauddin heard was Kafur's. He convinced the king that his own family was now his greatest threat. With the Sultan's mind completely warped by paranoia and fear, Kafur was no longer just a servant. He was the puppet master, and the king was dancing on his strings. Now, with the king's trust secured, Kafur was ready to make his first move, not against the prince, but against the one man powerful enough to protect him. With the Sultan's mind completely under his control, Kafur was ready to start removing pieces from the board. His biggest target, the one man powerful enough to stop him, was Alp Khan. Kafur convinced the Sultan that Alp Khan was the ringleader of the entire conspiracy, and, in a moment of paranoid fury, the dying king ordered his execution. With Alp Khan dead, Prince Khizr Khan had just lost his biggest protector. He was completely exposed. The final move was turning the father against his own son for good. Kafur convinced the Sultan that Khizr Khan's popularity with the people was proof that he was a traitor. He tricked the prince into leaving the capital, basically banishing him. But the heartbroken Khizr Khan couldn't stay away and came back to see his dying dad one last time. For a second, it looked like the family bond might actually win. The sick Sultan hugged his son, a moment of real love in a court full of lies. But Kafur was just too good at this game. He convinced the delirious Sultan that the prince was faking it, that the hug was just an act to get closer to the throne. The Sultan finally snapped. He gave Malik Kafur the one thing he wanted most, the power to imprison his own sons. Khizr Khan and his brother Shadi Khan were arrested and thrown into the dark fortress of Gwalior. Their mother was put under house arrest. The heirs were gone. The rivals were dead. The path was clear. But for Malik Kafur, just locking them up wasn't enough. He needed to make sure they could never, ever challenge him. And what he did next was unbelievably cruel. The heirs were gone. The rivals were dead. The path was clear. But for Malik Kafur, just locking the princes up in a fortress wasn't enough. In the 14th century, a living prince, even one in a jail cell, could become a symbol for a rebellion. To secure his power forever and make sure they could never challenge him, Kafur did something unbelievably cruel. He ordered them to be blinded. In a cold, dark cell in the Gwalior fortress, Prince Khizr Khan, the man who was born to be emperor, was held down by guards. A hot metal rod was shoved into his eyes, a brutal and agonizing act designed to send a terrifying message. A blind man could never be sultan. This wasn't just an assault, it was the public execution of his royal status. His brother, Shadi Khan, suffered the exact same fate. The news that his beloved sons had been so brutally mutilated was the final shock for the dying Sultan Alauddin. Whether it was from the grief of this ultimate betrayal, or, as some people still whisper, a final dose of poison from Kafur, Sultan Alauddin Khalji died on January 4, 1316. The mighty tyrant was dead. Kafur did not waste a single second. The very next day, he produced a fake will from the late Sultan, disinherited the blinded princes, and named Alauddin's youngest son, a 5-year-old kid named Shihabuddin, as the new emperor. A child was the perfect puppet. The tyrant was dead. The heirs were broken. The slave was now running the entire empire, and the true horror was just getting started. With the Sultan dead and his heirs broken, Malik Kafur, the 1,000-dinar slave, was now the master of the entire empire. He put the 5-year-old child, Shihabuddin, on the throne, made himself regent, and became the de facto Sultan of Delhi. To make things even crazier, he forced Alauddin's widow, the new child sultan's own mother, to marry him. He was now the stepfather of the king he controlled. This was the ultimate power grab. The court was absolutely terrified. Every morning, Kafur would hold a fake ceremony with the child sultan to look official. Then he'd send the kid away to play and rule like an absolute dictator. For 35 days, Malik Kafur ruled the Delhi Sultanate. It was a short reign, but it was 35 days of pure terror. He knew his power was built on thin ice. The nobles hated him, and he had no real claim to the throne. So he started a bloody purge. Anyone even suspected of being loyal to the old dynasty, nobles, guards, officers, was arrested, had their property taken, or was just executed without a trial. Delhi was filled with fear. Nobody was safe. But Kafur knew he had one last loose end to take care of. One final threat to his power: Alauddin's teenage son, Mubarak Khan. Kafur had him arrested and gave the final, brutal order. He was to be blinded, just like his brothers. The assassins were on their way. The Khalji dynasty was about to be wiped out for good by the very man their father had trusted most. In this insane environment of Kafur's 35-day reign, a dark legend began to spread through the terrified streets of Delhi. The official story was that the princes were blinded and imprisoned, which was horrifying enough. But the whispers on the street were way more gruesome. The most horrific story was about the oldest prince, Khizr Khan. The legend says that after being blinded on Kafur's orders, the prince was flayed, skinned alive. Now, did this actually happen? Probably not. There's no real proof in the history books, so it's almost certainly a legend born out of how terrified people were of their new ruler. But the point of this story isn't about whether it's literally true. It's about what it says about Malik Kafur. People believed he was capable of something this monstrous. His cruelty was so extreme that the most nightmarish thing you could possibly imagine seemed like something he would totally do. The legend of the skinned prince became the ultimate symbol of his tyranny, turning him from a power-hungry politician into a literal monster in the eyes of the people. This story also clears up our title. While it was Malik Kafur, the de facto sultan who was about to be killed by his own men, it was his victim, Prince Khizr Khan, who was rumoured to have been skinned alive. The fact that their fates got twisted together in legend just shows you how chaotic and brutal this time was. Kafur's reign of terror was at its peak. He had everything he ever wanted, but a throne built on fear is the most fragile thing in the world, and the terror he used to get power was about to blow up in his face. Malik Kafur's bloody reign lasted just 35 days. The very men he commanded, the elite palace guards known as the Paiks, had been Sultan Alauddin's personal bodyguards for years. They were fiercely loyal to their dead master and had watched in silent horror as Kafur systematically destroyed his family. They saw him blind the princes and terrorize the court, and they knew with chilling certainty that they were probably next on his list. A slave who betrays his master will undoubtedly betray his servants. The breaking point was the order to blind the last prince, Mubarak Khan. The story goes that the young prince made one last, desperate move. When the guards entered his cell, he reminded them of their loyalty to his father and warned them that their new master could not be trusted. Then, in a brilliant act of desperation, he threw them his own jeweled necklace, a bribe to save his life and a down payment for revenge. Whether it was the bribe, their loyalty to the old sultan, or simple self-preservation, the Paiks made their move. That night in February 1316, the guards stormed Malik Kafur's bedroom. One of the guards, who was permitted to carry a weapon in the palace, struck the first blow. His friends rushed in and, in a swift and brutal act of vengeance, beheaded the man who had been the most feared person in the empire only moments before. The de facto sultan was killed by his own men. The 1,000 dinar slave, the genius general, the ultimate betrayer, was dead on the floor of his chamber. It was a brutal end to a short and brutal reign. The assassins immediately freed Mubarak Khan and put him on the throne, first as a regent for his child brother. But just a few months later, he did exactly what Kafur would have done. He had his little brother blinded and thrown in prison, taking the throne for himself. And in the most insane twist, when the very guards who had saved his life came asking for their reward, the new Sultan Mubarak Shah had them all executed. In this brutal world, even loyalty could get you killed. So, after all that chaos, what's the lesson here? I think it boils down to three things. First, power built on fear will always collapse. Kafur's reign of terror lasted just 35 days because the same fear he used to get power was the very thing that blew up in his face. Second, betrayal is a virus. Alauddin betrayed his uncle to get the throne, Kafur betrayed Alauddin, and then Mubarak Shah betrayed his own saviors. It was a vicious cycle that consumed everyone. And finally, ambition without limits destroys everything. Malik Kafur, the slave who rose higher than anyone, ended up destroying his master's entire legacy. His hunger for power was so massive, it burned down the entire empire, including himself. This story is 700 years old, but it feels like it could be ripped from today's headlines. It's about corporate backstabbing, political coups, and the universal truth that those who live by the sword often die by it. The legend of the prince being skinned alive might not be true, but it's the perfect horrifying symbol for what Malik Kafur did to the empire. He ripped it apart, piece by bloody piece. But what do you think? Was Malik Kafur a total monster? Or was he just a brutal creation of the crazy paranoid world he lived in? Was it pure ambition? Or was he getting revenge on the system that enslaved him? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you thought this story was as insane as we did, smash that like button and subscribe for more hidden histories. Thanks for watching.